Hi, and welcome to part 6 of the Design a Card Game tutorial. In this part we'll look at a few things. We're going to do a few sort of improvements to the code to make sure the cards can resize properly. We're then going to move the card slots around so I can place cards in a grid. First on the list, we're going to look at changing this card size. So far this is fixed at 125 by 175. If we want to change it, for example if I change that to be 6% of its current size, we want that to nicely automatically change so everything works out. And you see straight away, that's fairly poor. So we'll look for a few things that can help us make that bit of code work. Most problems come from is in my card base, obviously, and it comes from the fact that ages when I first started this, I thought we could have pivot the offset. So basically, the reason it does this is we assume the card is centered around the middle, which makes stuff like zooming and zooming out so much easier. However, it turns out because the center is down the middle rather than the top left, we have a lot of coding problems to get the positions just right. So in fact, it's significantly easiest is if I just cancel that whole pivot offset. Okay, it makes a few things harder to zoom in, but the benefits outweigh the costs there. So let's make a few changes to that. If I go to my play space, the main difference it makes anywhere where I had to offset set for card size, which is basically this line of code here. Now we don't need to do that. We can straight away delete those, and they are absolutely fine. Next, you may notice that when we had the old code, my card spread looked horrendous. The cards were just too far spaced apart. And that's basically because that card spread implicitly assumed we had this size of card. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have it now adjust based on that card size. The way I want to do it is I'm going to use card size X. So basically I haven't changed this card size at all. These things are the same and I have the exact same card spread. However, when this card size changes, the card spread will change to mirror that. Basic coding things, you basically don't want to divide in times just for the sake of it. You can merge those together. So if I bung these over here, I can have this as one sum. So if I do 0.25 divided by 1.25, I just get 0.002. And that will change quite a few things. Let's see what's done so far. So straight away the cards are starting in the right place. My card spreads are not nicer. But now you can see that my zoom is going a bit strange, which kind of expected, and also they're going in the wrong position now. So we're going to change that as well. So because the cards are pinned too high, I'm going to change my center card oval, which is basically where the cards sort of have a center point on. And if it works out, and this 1.2 was where there is a 1.32. I'm also going to make a change further down here. So when we organize the hands, we have this term here. Why I said the position is going to be the center card oval plus this oval angle vector, which is basically how far left or right we go, and then minus card size. Okay, I'm going to change it slightly because that's going to shift it too far now. All I want to do is just minus the y value of the card size. So vector to 0, card size dot y. Okay, if we look at that, that should be making the cards appear in the right position now. There we go. Okay, so that bit of code's working. Just a few more changes before I do that. And there's a slight bug. Here we have a bit of code that dealt if a card to change position if I click two cards really quickly. In case the cards to sort of zoom really quickly, as a sort of 1 second of time sort of went to an end. We make it a bit nicer, we're just saying you can slow down time a tiny bit here. Okay. So we're going to say give the card an extra sort of 0.1 of a second to find its home. Now into the card base, we're going to change a few things. What I want to change here is basically the zooming in code. So when the cards zoom in now, just look really quickly, we say sort of do it lopsidedly. And again, that's because we have lost the pivot offset. So basically to put what that did for us back into the code. Before I do that again, another quick bug I found here at line 170. I had the -1 here. I've actually updated that. In the end of the last episode that we don't do the -1 anymore. That was causing a few zoom problems where it sort of lost track of how many cards were in. Okay, all we need to do for this is change our target position. So if we head down about here, where we enter a mouse and we call the target position. Okay, so before we set the target position to be the card's current position, here I'm just going to define the target position X and Y separately. So for the target X position, it's going to be the card's X position. And then I just need to minus half of the card size. And that card size is called in the play space. So we go up 2 nodes, we call card size, and we just minus half of it off. And now we know it's working okay. So we have one card. We're now zooming in the same way we just did absolutely before. But now everything's working nice. In fact, the cards are a bit smaller. More quick changes we need to do. Heading up here. Here we call just a random vector 2. That should have been the card size. We can change that now. We're going to grab the actual card size. So it's basically this exact same thing here. I've got one more change to make. That's in the in-mouse section of my physics process. And again, to the offset, we now have this minus card size divided by 2. I just noticed one more slight bug where I assumed something I shouldn't have assumed. Here in the focus in hand code, I've told it to zoom in by a factor of 2. But that 2 should just be the zoom in size, which in this case is 2, but it won't always necessarily be 2. Okay, that covers the first part. Now the code should be happy to run in any size of card, which is really helpful. Next we're going to do is we're going to look at adding more card slots. So just run this. So far we've got one card slot right here. Again, if you saw earlier, I want like 2 different teams, each one card slots for the troops to go into. We're now going to add all of those. Now to work this out, what I would do first, I would sort of sketch out a piece of paper of everything, where you want everything to go, what gaps you want, etc, etc. I just stole some A paper from the bin at work and used that. And so I can see straight away what gaps I wanted, how big the gaps needed to be, and so on and so forth. Okay. To do this, anything gets handled in place space. We're adding a fair bit of code here. Okay, now I'm just going to basically barrage this code with a bunch of definitions for various margins. First, I need to define the number of columns I want, which is 2. That is 2 columns per side, so it'll be 4 in total. Next, I need to describe the number of rows. I'm also going to have a variable called card slots per size, which is basically how many card slots each side has, which needs to define by number of rows times number of columns. Next, I need to define a lot of viewports. Okay, and with this, I've tried to name them as sensibly as I can, so it's kind of obvious which each of them are in relationship to my funny little scribble on the paper found in the bin. So basically, all the things I'm describing now is basically areas that I know my card slot can't go into. I then need to work out the total height of my card slot and the total width they have, so I can then work out the height and width I need for each card. So the total allowed card slot height is going to be the height of everything. I then have an outer Y margin at the top, and I've also got my card zone height at the bottom. So everything's got a little gap at the top and a big gap at the bottom. I can use my card slots. I then do the same thing for the width. No, it's only this for one of the sides. So I want the viewport halved, and then take away everything I've got. So on each side, I'm going to have one outer X margin. I'm also going to have half of the middle X margin, because half will go for each base. And I'm also going to have the card slot base width again for the castle, keep, management, kill, etc, etc. Okay, now to find all the stuff painstakingly, I can now quite nicely describe the height for each card and the width for each card. So I'm working this out. The key to remember is that you have to take into account that the cards have gaps between them. That's these 2 terms here. So what I need to do to work out the height for each card, I get the total height. I then need to minus how many gaps between cards I'm going to have. So I have 5 rows. Because I've got 5 rows, that means I'm going to have 4 gaps between those 5 rows. And I need to times that by the Y gap. So here gives me the total height available for cards. Because there's 5 rows, that means there's going to be 5 cards. So eventually I have to divide this by the number of rows. And then we do roughly the exact same thing for the width for each card. I'm basically copying that through. We get to this. Okay. After all that madness, we now have all the stuff we need to define each of my card slots. I'm just going to bung that in the ready function. So we're going to comment all of this. We'll come back to use some of it later. What we need to do now is basically add a bit of code that's going to spawn all those card slots. Okay, again, we've already got one of them over here, so this code is kind of already there. We're going to do this by using 3 for loops. So first for I in the range of 2, so 1 or 2. That's basically going to describe both sets of players. Then from there, I need to loop through the number of columns and the number of rows as well. So first, we are going to describe a new card slot. We're going to insert the card slot. We need to describe its size and its position. So its size, we know. We want to use card size. We want it the same size as a card where possible. We might scale it if we need to. Key difference here is that to make it a bit nicer, as you saw from my diagram earlier, I want everything rotated by 90 degrees. I'm actually going to rotate this. I'll say I want the vector 2, and I want the y variable first, and the x variable, which will have the effect of basically rotating it around by 90 degrees. Next, I need to try where it's going to go. So, new slot rect position. And that's going to basically depend on all the stuff we've described up here. So, we want to basically think, you want to start working this out from the first top left card slot. So, let's do that. So, for the top left position, first thing to do is we need to push on by the outer X margin. We're going to start right at the top left. We also can't start after the outer X margin because we've also got the base or castle. Should have plus that on as well. And also at the top left, I've got my outer Y margin. So that's the first part of where the first card slot is going to go. Next, because I've got this function here for k in the range number of rows, I can then say for each value of k, shift it down by the amount it should be shifted down by. So plus k times vector 2 0. Again, I don't want to shift along left or right. That's why there's 0 there. I just want to shift up and down. So it needs to move down by the height for each card, which I've described up here. And then of course we've also got the margin between the cards. And that is card slot Y gaps. So if I run that now, it will now spawn the first 5 card slots down the first 1 column. Now I want to run it for the next column and for the next player. Okay, I'm now going to start a new line. This gets fairly messy. We now need to add on something else if I'm in column 2. So which column we're in is defined by the variable j. So it's going to be j times, and I want a vector 2. I'm going to shift it left and right, not up and down. So my second variable is going to be 0. And it's going to be based on the card slot total width. There we go. Because we've got 2 columns, it's going to be divided by 2. So basically want half total width, but that's what's going to be. To do it more properly, I want to divide by the number of columns. Now I say if you've got 3 columns, that means we want a new column to start a third of the way along each time. If we had 4 columns, a fourth of the way, and so on and so forth. We're going to do the exact same thing if we are player 2. So if player 2 had a similar loop, and that's going to be I times, and now I want to shift the whole thing along by basically half the screen. So another vector 2, again we're not shifting it up and down, which means my second variable will be 0, and I want to add on the whole card width. That's not all. Remember in the middle, we had our little middle X margin. So we want to add on that as well. For this now, I'll probably make a terrible mess because I haven't told it to sort of resize my scales. In fact, nothing's appeared. That's significantly worse. Significantly worse. Where have they all gone? We don't know. Okay, if we run this code now, nothing will happen because the card slots don't exist anywhere. Last we need to do, I think, the same bit of code down here. You need to add these as children. So if we run it now, it might make a whole mess because I don't know what size the cards are going to be. Actually, that's fine. But to illustrate my point better, let me change my card sizes back to 1. If I run this, my card slots are now too big. So we start overlapping. What I want it to do, I want it so it's going to automatically update the scale based upon how much size it's going to be. So let's just add a line in to do that now. Got it here before we spawn the cards. So we get our new slot and we're going to change its scale. So if we need to scale it up or down, we have that freedom to. I want to scale according to the height. We typically have no space left or right. So the height for the card divided by, and I want it's just its height of the card itself. And note, I'll be more proper, I'll do a minimum of the width and the height. But here, always tends to be the height, tends to be the limiting factor here, so I'm not going to bother doing the width as well. It'll be roughly the exact same code. So that'll automatically update. And I think I have the same thing here, yeah. I have a variable here that can use slightly more of this part, which is called CardSlot empty, which tells me whether or not a card slot is empty. So running that, we see the card slots are slightly bigger. You can notice that. We can check they're still working, the scaling code. If I change this back to a 1, they shouldn't get any bigger or any smaller. They get smaller, that's because we basically got more space down here for the cards to take up. So they've got less space to fit into. But yeah, that's doing what we want it to do. Okay, last thing we're going to do here. In any of our previous parts, we had these enemies, or this one enemy, described here that we could hit. I'm just going to port it now and use them as basic bosses or bases right now. So the code's base width over here, so we can use that. To do that, I'm going to duplicate my enemy. I'm going to have an enemy for the left hand side and an enemy for the right hand side. Go back into this code. I may just want to copy this down twice. Let's get rid of all my new card slot stuff. Copy this, or uncomment this. And I should quickly change this around. So now I've got enemy left and enemy right. Let's do enemy left first. This enemy will look a lot better if we flip the image. The box container, image container, image. And we want to flip that horizontally. So that is true. For the left guy, he'll be reflective, for the right guy, he won't. So they both sort of face the right way. Okay, we're now trying position. What I'm going to do that is I'm going to first say where I want the center of this guy to be. I want his center to be on the x coordinate. I want the margin first, and then I want his center to be exactly halfway through the base width. And for the y coordinate, I want the castle to be basically halfway up. So my total available height halved. This will of course describe the total corner of my picture, so I then need to shift it by its apparent size. Okay, so keep in mind I've scaled it slightly here, which should be a bit higher actually. And because I've scaled it, I need to take that into account when I do that. And we just want the rectangular size of that. And then I need to times that by its scale. So it's getting unfortunately long. And you need to halve that, so we want to move by half his total size, so his center point is going to work out right. First, my left hand side do stuff sorted. I then need roughly the exact same thing for the guy on the right hand side. Okay, let's see what I need to change. What we need to change here is going to be what position he takes in. It's not a huge difference. The only difference is going to be is that rather than adding on these little bits here, I want to take them away. So I want to start on the right hand side. So the right hand side is going to be the viewport size, the x coordinate of this, minus the outer x margin, minus half his base width. And then that should be fine. The height doesn't change. But I still want to minus half its size to appear centralized. Let's run that and hope for the best. And yeah, there we go. We can do some more work, some scaling at some point. And again, like I said earlier, we can shift these slots of cards across it better if I can. So far this one's clipped slightly, but this one isn't. Okay, so that's the first couple of things done. I've got the card slots placed nicely. And I have my resize cards down here. Next thing to do, I need to fix it so when I click, things will drag and snap nicely into place right here. First thing I want to do is in my card base code, I want to change how the old state is defined up here. Just keep track of the state we just came from. That was kind of useful. Whenever I click a card, my old state is always focused in hand, which makes it kind of useful. We're going to re-enter the N when my mouse first enters a card. So you have the exact same line on here. Old state is state. And that means there won't always be the old state being focused in hand. Adding on for this, I'm going to add that I can also focus on cards that are in play, which I'll change more later on. Here I said if old state is focus in hand, and like I just said, that's now going to be completely redundant. After my old state was in my hand, as in it was ready to be picked up. It's also an edge case I should cover for, which is the case where the old state I could have just moved my mouse quickly, and it could be reorganized hand. Okay, next I'm going to do, I've defined CardSlots and CardSlots empty up here. There's no reason for that. Makes a bit more sense if I just define it in my general list of variables. Lovely. Okay, next we need to do is sort out this whole if CardSlots empties code. I'm going to change a fair bit now. The main difference is that when I drop a card into a slot, I now want to be able to rotate 90 degrees either way depending on which side we're in. So let's throw those changes in now. So same as before. There's no reason these are defined as variables in here. Let's just define these outside because we use this a fair bit in this code. Okay, and again we've got a similar problem here. This will get the size of the card slot, but that doesn't take into the fact we've scaled it up or down. So I need to multiply this by basically the exact same term, but rather than rect size, I want rect scale at the end there. And this will now represent the actual in-game physical size of the card slots. And same again, I'm going to not have this defined as a variable here. Let's quickly run that change 3. Okay, let's see what we need to change. Main thing I have to do is first, after this if loop, this is when I've decided that my mouse is in my card slot. And a new line which now says that card slot is full. So for that I can simply say card slot empty of I is now false. Okay, next we don't need these lines here anymore because I don't completely rewrite them. I'm going to have two cases. We're going to have if I'm in the left hand side or if I'm in the right hand side of my card slots. So if I is less than the number of card slots per size, again that's something we defined all the way in my play space. So this basically describes my left hand side, and this will be the right hand side. So for basically player 1 and player 2. I'm going to have a new variable thrown in here. That basically says, yes, I am on my left hand side. Again, let's define that as a var up here, being false. Okay, I then need to have a target rotation. I now want to rotate by 90 degrees. And when I'm on the when for player 2, it's going to rotate by minus 90 degrees. They always sort of face towards the center. And next, I will quickly change my target scale. That's not going to change much. So for the card slot slides, we had it rotated by 90 degrees, which basically means my Y and my X vectors for length got switched around. So we need to switch them back. Okay, and now the main thing we need to describe here is going to be the target position. So if I just said that wouldn't quite work. Okay, we're going to see why this won't quite work. First thing, I need to change my in-play code ever so slightly. So we're scrolling here to match in play. We can see here it assumes my rotation will always be 0 degrees, which now isn't true. So let's change that to target rotation, target rotation. And we're going to see that it's not going to quite rotate as we want it to. So basically what's happened there is rotated about this corner here, and I have basically the exact same problem if I do it over here as well. It's rotating around the wrong corner. So I want to make sure that for my left hand card, where this one should be, it rotates around this corner, and for this right hand side it should rotate around this corner for it to match on my cards. Let's change those now. So back to this card. I now want to basically shift it along by the width of a card slot. So for that I can simply do by saying vector 2, and I just want the card slot size, and just the X variable of that. And for the other ones I want the exact opposite. So now it's looking a bit better. It should now nicely snap to where it should be. Come here you. There we go. Okay, actually we've still got a few things to sort out. Let's go through them now. So you saw the problem that is basically trying to rescale or reorganize the card into hand when it was already in play. We should have done that. So we're going to have a new variable, it's quite a lot this time, which is card in play is true. This is basically going to say whether or not a card is in play. Simple as that. Okay, I'm going to say in special cases, if the card's in play, don't reorganize it, don't move it, kind of treat it as fixed. Okay, and the menu that's coming from, I believe, is where we try and reorganize neighbors that don't quite exist. So here I'm going to say we can only reorganize neighbors if a card is not in play. So if card in play is false, we can run this code, otherwise we can't. Going to use a lot more in this code later on. Next thing to do right now is up here I'm going to change this match date. Because again, anything that's in play is trying to get matched. So basically, if I release any card, it's going to basically do stuff to all the cards that are in play. So you see you've got one card in play. However, if I click and drag another card, it's going to zap that first card to it. Okay, another thing to notice, actually I'll do it now. Here my mouse sender's not aligned. So if I go to my in-mouse code on my match dates, this should be divided by 2. Okay, then we're going to fix those problems. Is right to my input event, this match date is causing a few problems here. So basically whenever a card's in play, it's going to want to try and execute this code to it. We're going to run these as basically 2 separate if loops. So first things first, this code should only be executed if the state is focus at hand. Let's delete this. Let's ping these back a bit. And I want to say if my state is focus in hand. We can then do the whole card selecting code. I want to do the same thing here, where if this card is released, we can run this as all as one big if loop. So let's scroll all the way down and just have that here. And that should basically fix all those problems. So now each card should be free to act independently. Okay, next we're going to add a bit of code so that cards can now zoom in correctly when they're in play. So we set up a card in play variable. We want to do the same thing. We want how much we need to zoom in when we're in play. So zoom in size in play. Yeah, that's very confusing. What's wrong with it? I'm going to fix that as 1.2. So things will get 20% bigger when I zoom in on them. We now want a new if loop explaining when the card is in play. So these match dates are fine. And we're going to say if card in play is true. Let's do some stuff. Okay, I'm going to define a few new things here. First of all, let's just fix the else loop of that code. So that's not going to change if the card's not in play. First thing here, I'm going to force the old state to be in play. Just to get some focus in hand, I want to make sure that I'm noting down somewhere that yes, this card is in play, and we're just looking at it in play. So we're going to force this. We're going to set up some old positions and also an old scale, because basically these are sort of defined based upon the card slots, and it's confusing if I don't sort of jot down somewhere where they've come from. So when I want to finish zooming, I want to zoom back out, I want to know where they need to go back into. Okay, let's define both these as variables. We'll do that up top as we always do. Yeah. Okay. Next, I want to say if on the left hand side, I want one target position, and if on my right hand side, I want another target position. So my target position is going to be old position, and then I need to shift it slightly based on how I'm zooming it in. This is the best to explain verbally, but when I zoom in, I want to shift it up and to the left by half the amount it's going to zoom in by. I always do it by half, because that way it'll keep the center fixed as the center point. I hope that made some amount of sense. Let's throw it in. So I've got my card slot size. That's how big the card slot currently is. I then want to times it by a half. And then I need to work out the amount I'm zooming in by. So I've got my zoom in size in play. When I'm getting 20% bigger, that means I want to shift it by 10%. So this was increased by 20%. If I minus 1, this just says this is just find 20% of my zoom in size, which is basically the difference. And then, because I want to shift this up and to the right, because my top left corner of my card is the top right square of the card slot. Yes, this is confusing. I want to times it by this vector 2. So this vector 2 basically means, let me grab a card slot. So here is where the top corners are aligned. This vector 2 just means go in that direction. So I'm basically going to move the center to here. So it'll zoom in like this. For the right hand side, it's the exact same thing. The card I was running here, I shifted it down. So my top left corner is here. And for it to zoom in properly, I want to shift the center down and to the left. So I'll go here, which means it'll then zoom in nicely around the card slot. So let's do the exact same bit of thing for the right hand side. So I'm just going to copy this line, throw it in else loop, and this vector 2 should flip around. It's going to be -1 and 1. Okay, so both of those will adjust for where the top left corners now move to. What do you need to do next? Just the usual gump that I've got down here. Setup is true, zoom in is true, and go to my state focus in hand. Here I'm going to start slight problems because we now need 2 sort of loops in focus in hand based upon whether the card is in play or whether it's not in play. So let's head to focus in hand. Again, everybody didn't slightly hear when I said don't reorganize neighbors when focus in hand. So the position code is fine. That's going to work for both cases, whether I'm in play or whether I'm not. And now some slight differences here. If the card is in play, I'm going to change my scale. So this size, rather than be zoom in size, you want it to be my zoom in size in play. There's too many ins there. Good. A few less zooms there. So scale's going to change. It's also not going to change based on the original scale. That was the original size when the card is in my hand. When it's in pen little card slots, so it's going to be different. So we're going to have a new thing. We're not going to have an old thing. We're going to reuse the start scale variable. So we're going to use start scale, so it scales according to its current size. I'm not going to change rotation. When I zoom in, it's just a orientation. So I'm going to throw both these other 2 lines in my else loop. Of course, I need to do the same thing on this else loop here. The vector scale needs to equal the zoom in size in play times by the start scale. And again, run the other 2 things in my else loop. Okay, let's see how that's doing. So that's zooming in nicely now, however it's not zooming out. So let's change that. That's because a few minutes ago, we basically told it not to do anything when the card is in play. We're going to change that now. It's going to run roughly the same code as before. Setup is true, state of the organized hand. Only thing to be different is my target position. So again, a second ago, we wisely decided to have a new variable called old position. And I'll say go back basically from where you came from. We now need to make a few changes as well in the organized hand to account for that. So let's head to there. Okay, again, they change our masses. We run an if loop here, which says if card is in play, get the scale back to what it was. We had an old scale, which basically was its original size. Again, we're not changing rotation, so we can ignore that. Throw these 2 in the elf loop. Also, to organize neighbors code, we don't want to run it if the card is in play. I'll just grab this thing and throw it here. Okay, yep, and also make a similar adjustment to the else loop here. What's more important, I want the state to be in play. Huzzah. Okay, that should have fixed quite a few bugs and not properly working features. So zooms in, zooms out. If I click another card, both cards are fine to zoom in and zoom out independently of one another. And nothing's going horrendously wrong. Okay, we do have a slight bit of a fix now, which is that these enemy hitboxes are way off. I've actually described this already. The problem with that is the fact I haven't times by the scale. So let's find where that code lives. So here I said enemy size is just get the size. Again, that's not its true in-game size. To work out its in-game size, we could times that by the scale. That should have hopefully fixed the slightly wonky enemy hitboxes. So put it in play. If I try and attack anyone, I now have to be right on top of them. Oh, we have 1 bug there. We've got a few bugs here. So when I click and drag a card, we're actually sort of slowly tracking down and to the left. So we can face a tracking problem by a simple loop here. Where I say if my card is in play, I want to say its target position was its old position. So that just stopped the tracking issue. So let's try that now. Yeah, so now it goes straight back to where it came from. But if you notice as we do this, if you look at the bottom left, my debugger's clocking on. So it's got something going wrong there. And what's going wrong here, you're complaining about me removing and adding children. This is when I put a card into play, it goes out of cards and into card in play. However, I keep calling that same bit of code and it's saying, look, I can't do anything with that now. What do I do? To do that, we just need a simple if loop. So we're going to work out where that's called. So I have a parent card called over here. And I'm going to slightly rejig this. And I'm going to call this in the same place I've done my setup. So it basically runs it right away. And also, I only want to call it once. So I'm going to say if we can reparent, then do reparent my card, and then say we've reparented now, so reparented now false. So we can't reparent it more than once. As it's yelling at me, we're going to add a variable there, which is called reparent, which is basically saying whether or not I can reparent this. Okay, let's see if that stops that little bug there. So what that was. We've got one card there. And yeah, these cards are behaving nicely before they're getting a bit confused. Especially I removed all these cards from their parents. Okay, we've got an issue there. Let's fix that now. So this issue is caused when I basically keep my mouse hovering over my card. It doesn't quite go in the right place. So let us fix that now. What I haven't done here, I need to throw in some rotation code as well. So when I drop a card in straight away, the rotation is fixed at 0. And I want to say move it to whatever rotation it wants to be, whether that's plus or minus 90. So let's add those two lines in there. And fingers crossed that'll look a bit smoother. Target rotation, that is not target rotation. Play and let us hope for the best. There we go. Bit of a strange zoom in, but I think it does the job. Okay, so we'll call it into part 6 here. In part 7, what I'm going to do is when I click on a card, it's just going to highlight what cards I can possibly attack. So here I can attack in a straight line, so I can attack this guy. Same here, there's no one to attack, so we can attack the base instead. We can highlight those and then work out some basic stuff where I can't do anything that I shouldn't. Aside from that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon for part 7.